You're listening to Side Hustle Pro, the podcast that teaches you to build and grow a side hustle from passion project to profitable business. And I'm your host, Nikayla Matthews. So let's get started. Hey, this is Nikayla here with episode 49 of Side Hustle Pro. Today's show is all about the legal aspects of entrepreneurship. A few episodes back, I opened up the show for Q&A, and many of you had some burning legal questions that you were dying to get answered. So today, I've invited attorney Art Steele to the guest chair. Art Steele is a tax lawyer who founded her own law firm in 2014 with practice areas in small business counseling, international trust and estate planning, immigration, and foreign tax compliance. Before launching her law firm, Art began her legal career as a transactional tax associate at Skadden, Arps, Slate, Meagher, and Flom, LLP in Washington, D.C. She later worked as tax counsel for global tax planning at Discovery Communications in Silver Spring, Maryland. Her international tax background brings a unique perspective when advising clients regarding small business formation, estate planning, and immigration. Art is also an adjunct professor of wills, trusts, and estates at American University, Washington College of Law, and is barred in Virginia, Maryland, and the District of Columbia. Funny story about Art. When I shared in my episode where it talked about forming my LLC via Incorporate.com and how happy I was, Art actually hit me up on the side like, you didn't have to pay that much, right? And go through Incorporate.com. I believe she actually told me that it pained her heart. And at first I was like, who is this dramatic woman and why won't she let me live? Then I did some research, actually talked to her on the phone and realized not only did she know what she was talking about, but she was actually building a platform to educate more small businesses about the legal aspects of entrepreneurship. In the end, I realized I wasn't bothered at all that Art pointed out what I could have done differently, because on this entrepreneurship journey, sometimes you'll make blunders. But I want to bring Art on the show to share her knowledge with the Side Hustle Pro audience so that you can save yourself the time, Google search, and stress of trying to figure out some of these legal aspects of entrepreneurship on your own. Before we jump into our special episode with Art, I want to let you know that this podcast is brought to you by FreshBooks. Guys, FreshBooks recently unveiled an all-new version of their cloud accounting software. It's been redesigned for exactly the way we work as entrepreneurs. It has the simplest system to track your clients, expenses, projects, and more. I've been using and loving these features ever since I formed an official business entity this year. FreshBooks is user-friendly and it has powerful features that help you to stay organized and get paid in a timely fashion. With FreshBooks, you can create and send professional-looking invoices in less than 30 seconds, set up online payments with just a couple of clicks, and see when your client has seen your invoice. If you want to create and send branded invoices in no time like me, FreshBooks has a special offer for my Side Hustle Pro listeners. You can get a free, unrestricted 30-day trial of FreshBooks. Just go to freshbooks.com/sidehustlepro and enter Side Hustle Pro in the How Did You Hear About Us section. Alrighty? I also just want to remind you that I'll be going live each week for an after-show chat on my Facebook page on Thursdays at 9:30 p.m. So if you're not already doing so, head over to Facebook and like the Side Hustle Pro page. That's facebook.com/sidehustlepro. And then you'll get the notification when I go live. I can't wait to chat live about this episode with you guys this week. So see you Thursday at 9:30 p.m. Eastern. Now, one last thing before we get into the show, I'm going to share Art's legal disclaimer. I want to remind you that all of the information on this podcast and on our websites, including downloads, are for your information and educational purposes only. You're listening to this podcast or downloading the worksheets does not create an attorney-client relationship with Art, the Shingle Life, or her law firm. If you have any specific questions, please consult with an attorney or an accountant authorized to practice law in your jurisdiction. Alrighty, now let's get into it. Hey, Art, welcome to the show and the Side Hustle Pro guest chair.
Thank you so much for having me, Nikayla. I'm so excited. This is an honor.
Too. you. Well, this is awesome to have you here because, as you know, I've been getting these questions and I want to be responsible and give people accurate answers. So that is your domain. And before we actually get into the questions, though, I would love to spend some time talking about your background because I think your background is so interesting. And I want people to know that not only are you an authorized legal expert, but you're also about this side hustle life.
Yes. I have a side hustle to my side hustle.
Right. So tell us a little bit about your background.
Okay, so I graduated from law school in 2009, and right after law school, I went to work for a major law firm in DC, and they were probably, I think, like maybe the one or two top law firm for the tax practice. And so that's where I started in the tax group. And there I just represented clients. I represented one client at trial, not me, by myself. Whenever I say I mean the firm. But yeah, so we represented clients who had issues with the IRS. And then we also, about halfway through my career there at the law firm, I decided to focus more on transactional tax work as opposed to the tax litigation, like when the IRS is suing you, because that gives you the opportunity to be more in an advisory role. And it just broadens your experience. And if you want to leave the firm, you have a lot of options as opposed to if you focus on litigation. So my firm is awesome, or was awesome. And they allowed me to go back to school, and they paid for me to get what's called an LLM, which is basically,
nice.
Yeah, I mean, and it was at Georgetown Law School, which is not cheap, and they paid for it completely. And I got an LLM in tax, which is like a master's degree in law, but specialization in tax law. So I took every type of tax course that you could think about under the sun. But the reason I did that is because I wanted to expand my transactional tax knowledge so that one day I would be able to go and work for a corporation and to be their inside tax person, as opposed to when a law firm or a company has to hire a law firm. And usually the people who they will hire to come inside and work for them, in-house counsel, are people who have transactional experience, because a lot of companies can't afford to do litigation because you leave that to like the big dog law firms.
So what made you want to hone in even more on taxation and get that LLM? Beyond wanting the transactional part of it, like you could have continued to get practitioner experience, right?
Right. Well, like whenever you get into a big law firm, it's not going to be long before you leave, because that's just the way it works, right? So the next thing you start thinking about is, what am I going to do when I leave here? Because you just know, like, either the burnout rate, the competition, the way the law firm model is set up, back in the good old days when I was recruited by law firms, a DC firm might bring in 30, 40 people each year, right? Then by the time anybody is old enough to become partner, there's like 2 people left. so you look up, it's all white male, and you're just like, not happening, right? So you immediately start thinking, or you should be thinking about, what are you going to do for your next step? And from everyone who I spoke to, that was the way to get more experience, or to have more options when it was time to leave. And I actually was very lucky because I left Skadden and I went to Discovery Communications, which is also known as the Discovery Channel, or better known as the Discovery Channel. And because of my transactional background, I was able to get a job where I was basically global tax counsel. And my boss and I were basically responsible for the worldwide tax planning for all of Discovery Communications, which had at the time, about 400 entities. So when people ask me, what entity should I start? I'm just like, oh, that's easy, because, I'm used to like dealing with so many more entities. And out of about 400 of those, I would say over half were international. And so we used to do a lot of tax planning, and it was just me and my boss. There were about 3 of us who were lawyers in the tax department. So all of that work fell on us. And the IRS is very sensitive about moving money in or out of the country, because they're immediately thinking, If it goes out of the country, we're not going to get paid. And if it's coming in the country, how are we going to get paid? So because Discovery had so many international entities, we had to always figure out all of the special rules that the IRS had set up in order for us to buy different entities. And for the company basically not to like lose a lot of money because it's really easy to trip over these rules. Anyway, won't get too much into this. I don't want people to fall asleep. But one of the
No, I am all the way tuned in because I'm just like, tell me more, because you think of TV, right? You think of communications, and I don't know the scope of Discovery Communications businesses and everything they own, but I know them for TV. So you think it's pretty straightforward, but from what you're describing, it's so complex, especially when it gets to the international part.
Well, and you know why it was so complex? It's because of intellectual property, right? So when you have tangible property, when you have real estate, you can't move real estate to France, right? You simply can't. Even personal property, you can take computers and machines and you can move them abroad. But with intellectual property, with like the click of your button, your intellectual property is in another country, right? If we buy a TV station in Turkey and they record all of the programming, let's say they charge, because in Turkey it costs $100 to film a movie, right? And then they send it over here to the US and then we charge X thousands of dollars. Now, I don't know much about how much movies and stuff charge, but if they make it for 100 and that's our company in Turkey and they send it to the US and we're charging X amount of dollars, we're getting an unfair advantage. And the question is, how much tax do you pay on that? So when it comes to intellectual property, is extremely sensitive, and the IRS's antennas are like, like whenever they're like, wait, did you say IP? So as a result of that, I actually dealt with a lot of IP, and not only on the international side, but on the domestic side as well, because there's so many rules when you have intangible property. For example, let's say Side Hustle Pro, you don't own any assets, right? Besides your laptop and probably your microphone and maybe some shirts. You don't.
I keep it very lean. I do keep it very lean.
Yeah, I mean, you don't own any assets. But if somebody came to you and said, I want to buy Side Hustle Pro, the question is, you're not going to sell it to them for the cost of your laptop, right? Because you've put goodwill. So the question is, how much do you charge for goodwill? What exactly is that, right?
I feel like I'm back in business school. Now I'm with you because, definitely remember those conversations.
Right. And the IRS doesn't care about goodwill. All they care about, how much are you going to say it's worth so we can tax it, right? So if you do it really low, they're like, wait a minute, we think this. And if you do it high, I mean, they don't care. But you're not going to do it high because you don't, for valuation purposes. But anyway, so that's the kind of stuff that I did. It was just trying to figure out the tax for almost every aspect of Discovery Communications.
And how long were you doing that before you start to feel like, okay, I kind of feel like I could go out on my own? What was that time like?
So after about 6 months, I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. But, it wasn't because of the experience. The substantive experience that I was getting from Discovery was amazing, as you can see, because one of the other things we did was a lot of digital content deals where a couple of YouTube channels or vloggers sold their company or their channel to Discovery. Discovery would just, they're looking for content, they're looking for new stuff, and they can't create all of it on their own. So they go out and buy it. And so we had a couple of vloggers, and these people are selling their YouTube channel to this multi-million-dollar company, and their lawyers are like people who have like no tax experience. And I'm like, what in the world? And so it just kind of made me think like, wow, I could be on the other side of this, right? With my experience, with the experience that I have. I know what a big company like Discovery would be looking for, or what would sweeten the deal for them, or what kind of offers they would make. And I know exactly what to advise my client who might be selling their channel, because there just aren't too many lawyers out there who know this stuff. So that's kind of the substantive reason. But, honestly, it just wasn't a good fit personality-wise, because I had gone from working with all lawyers at the law firm to working with non-lawyers. I don't mean to
Welcome to the creative world.
And I don't mean to sound snobby, but it was just like,
Right.
oh my God, like I can't do this because like, I don't know. And I think the reason is because I came from such an awesome law firm and everybody was just like, the people there were just amazing. And then you go into corporate America and it was just like, you know, like there's a director and a manager and a this and a that. And it's like everybody feels like whatever position is under them is really under them. And I used to work with a lot of the people in the accounting department and they were just like, why am I answering to you? You're not a director. You're just tax counsel. Where does that fit in? And it's like, what? Why do you need to know where I fit in to do what you got to do?
Right.
You do your job. Like, well, how about that?
Yes.
You know?
Can we just do the work? Yes.
Right.
I hear you 100%.
So after about 6 months, and people talk a lot about, you know, when do you leave your job? Well, how do you know when it's time and blah, blah, blah. And I've never told anybody this story before, but I remember about 6 months after I started at Discovery, first of all, the guy who recruited me was like, oh, you know, after 6 months, you're going to get a promotion, blah, blah, blah. So I'm like, okay, that's fine. Anyway, so 6 months comes around and he calls me in like his office to tell me that 2 of the people on our team had been laid off. And these were like directors. And one guy was like the VP of tax. And, you know, the first thing that came to my mind, the very first thing I said, and I almost said it out loud was, God, I wish it had been me. And I didn't even know that I was feeling that. And this was like 6 months into the job. And I was just like, whoa, where did that come from? And it was downhill from there. It was just like, okay, I know I don't want to do this. What am I going to do? And I started calling people, like I called a couple of my friends who had started their own law firms and spoke to them. And, you know, from that moment, I kind of knew. I was like, okay, I don't want to be here. And so I didn't leave until I think May of the following year. So I was there literally for like a year.
Yeah. Were you side hustling once you talked to your friends and kind of start to learn what went into starting your own firm? Were you doing any of that on the side?
Nope. And, you know, that's one of my biggest regrets is that I didn't, because I was too afraid. I didn't want to tell myself that that's what my heart was telling me to do. And I called my friends and asked them about it, but it was just too much to think about. So I just kind of pushed it to the side. Plus, because of my skills at the law firm and my skills at like the ones I had acquired at Discovery, I was getting a lot of calls from recruiters who were looking for people to come back to the law firm. And they would contact me. And at that time, the going salary for someone, because basically law firm salaries, for the most part, are good firms, are based on the year that you've come out of law school. And so at that point, I was looking at $250,000 salary. And so I was like, let me just see kind of how things shake out. Maybe I'll get a job at a firm again. But then I knew that I absolutely didn't want to go to a firm. So I was just scared. And it was because of my fear that I knew it was going to be a struggle. I knew I was going to take like a super duper duper pay cut. And I was just like, maybe something will come up. And I just ignored that feeling. But when I left Discovery, I never even applied for a job because I knew I wanted to start my own law firm. So it was just time that I wasted. I could have been learning about marketing, which is the biggest challenge I've had. But anyway, I felt it. I felt it 6 months in. I knew exactly what I wanted to do, but I was just so afraid to even think about it. And the kinds of stuff that came into my mind was like crazy stuff like, you know, Art, like you came from a major law firm. How would it look if you went out on your own? I mean, I know I'm embarrassed to say this stuff, but this is, I just.
But it's so common.
Yeah.
I think, you know, you say crazy stuff like it's so out of the scope of imagination, but it's actually the most common thing that I hear from people that comes up in my mind that we all go through like, but you know, how's it gonna look if
like look how the mighty have fallen. You've gone from working at Skadden Arps to like starting your own law school. Only people who start their own law school are people who don't get jobs out of law school. Like what? I mean, like, you know, it was ridiculous, like completely ridiculous. But hey, whatever. It was a learning experience. I'm glad for the road I walked.
Exactly. And, as I always say in the group now, and I try to hold myself to it too, because it's not something that you feel every day. Every day is a new day. You wake up with new doubts that you have to push your way out of. But the sooner you can let go of being concerned with other people's opinions in your decision making, the freer and better your life will be. So that's just one thing I try to put out there and embrace every single day. But now I really want to know, you finally left Discovery. What were some of the first steps you took to really get yourself established as your own firm? I remember you mentioned something about an initial letter you sent out to your contact list.
Yes. So I did stuff the old school way. Well, first of all, I will say that even though I didn't really prepare like networking wise to start my law firm, thank God I did have a really good job and honestly had almost about $95,000 when I left. So praise Jesus, because it's been rough. And if not for that, I literally would be out on the street. So that saving money is serious. It is serious. And I don't know what I would have done. I'm sure I would have done something, but it would have been like even harder because it's been like super duper hard. But at least I had that behind me. So I paid someone to make a website for me. I decided that, I don't know where I heard this, but somebody basically was like, you should send an announcement to every single person you know. Actually, I got the idea because I'm a member of the Virginia Bar and I was working at Skadden, which is like a, big firm in DC. And so every now and then I would get these announcement cards from law firms, like smaller law firms, mid-sized law firms, like maybe 10, 15 people. But because I was a member of the Virginia Bar, I guess they literally just went to the list of all the Virginia lawyers and sent them these announcements that would say, hey, I want to announce that so-and-so has joined the firm. So-and-so is a partner. So when I decided to start my firm, I was like, you know what? I'm going to send an email I sent an actual announcement in the mail to every single person who I knew. And it was funny because I got to the post office and I had all these cards and the lady was like, how do you want to pay for them? I don't want to scan I think it was like 100. I don't want to scan every 100 through the little letter thing. Can I just give you some stamps and you put it on there? And I was like, sure. What stamps do you have? And one of the stamps that she had was a butterfly. And I thought of the saying, like butterflies are free. And so that was the stamp that basically I used to send out my announcements, because it was like this moment of like announcing to the world, remember I had been ashamed of even telling anyone that I was going to start my own firm and what would they say. And so for me to be able to send this was like a really proud moment. But, I ordered it from like Vista. I had my graphic designer / ex roommate gave me a really good rate, designed my announcement card, and I literally sent it to every single person who I knew. And even like all of my contacts at the law firm, all of my people, like I grew up in the area. So everybody who I knew, family and friends, parents of my friends, because I wanted to go into estate planning. So I was like, they're going to need wills. So why not let them know? And so I did that. I think I spent like about $200 between postage and the actual announcement cards. And like a week after I sent it, my dentist called me, who I had been visiting like not quite often, but like I was getting a filling or something. So I was seeing him regularly and we would talk, but I never mentioned to him that I was starting my own firm. And he never mentioned to me that he was buying another practice. And so I sent him the card and he calls me and he says, hey, I'm looking to buy a practice. Will you represent me? Because I need a lawyer. And so he was my first client. And it was crazy because I had seen him all the time and we had never talked about this. And he knew I was a lawyer and we had just never talked about it. And so I think I got like a $6,000 or $7,000 fee from that. And I was like, wow, that was a good ROI. I mean, I spent like $200 and I got a $7,000 job. Not bad.
And that's why I love that story, because it's something that personal touch that we take for granted, or just that touch of like, let people know what you're doing. Like if you're in a corner doing stuff behind the scenes, people don't know, people can't pay you, people can't.
That's so true. And I've gotten so many referrals from my colleagues at the law firm because the first people who people go to ask for lawyers are other lawyers or, like the other lawyer who they know. So I've gotten a lot of work from them. And then another friend who I went to law school with, I had told her that I was starting my own firm, that I did tax law. And a friend of hers, his brother needed some help and he contacted me. And so those were like my first two clients before I even made like my Facebook announcement. I had two clients. And, when I started my firm, I really thought I wanted to do trust and estates, because I think it's like one of the best ways to transfer wealth. And I think it's one of the most overlooked ways, especially by minorities. So I was on this mission to like drive around with a bullhorn and just tell people that they needed to like do estate planning. But like the most of the work I've gotten has been from small businesses. And that's because, I don't want to say that there aren't people out here who don't have this skill, but that's because, I think I have a very unique set of skills. You don't really find a tax lawyer. A lot of people, especially online, talk about taxes and S corps, but when I listen to them anyway, maybe not when the layman does, but when I listen to them, I know they have no idea what they're talking about because they repeat the same thing everybody else says. But they don't understand like the actual reasons behind it. And that's one of the advantages that I have. And when my clients come to me and say, hey, I want to do X, Y, Z, and I'm just like, why? And then they're like, because this is what I'm trying to achieve. And I'm like, okay, well, if this is what you're trying to achieve, you need to really do this, because if you do that, you're going to get screwed down the line for taxes. But if you do it this way, then it's better. And there aren't too many people who can do that, because a lot of business lawyers, I don't know what their training is, but I don't think they really have a tax background. So that's one of the things that I've really been proud of.
And that's one of those, you definitely stood out to me. And, we started talking organically just through the Side Hustle Pro community and the Master the Gram community. And I have been approached by other attorneys, people who do business law, I suppose, but as a layman, I felt a huge responsibility to bring someone to the table who has the receipts, who has the practitioner's experience of doing this for a major business, for a major law firm, before like say, hey, believe this person. Because there's general information that anyone can spout. It was just, personally, I couldn't have that on my conscience. So,
It's so easy, because that's kind of one of the great things about being a lawyer is that you can develop, because of the skills that we're taught in law school, you can eventually get up to that pace. And I can tell you that for as long as I've been drafting LLC operating agreements and S corp agreements and all that stuff, there's still a lot of stuff I don't know, right? And this digital content, this stuff is changing every single day, but at the very least, there's some stuff I stay away from because I'm just like, that's not my expertise. And until I'm not going to advise a wide range of people on it, until I truly understand what I'm talking about, because there's always exceptions to exceptions.
And speaking of that, so we have to get into the meat. We've been teasing people enough, but I just wanted to get into a little bit of your background and how you're helping people. Now it seems like you're passionate about entrepreneurs navigate the legal world without feeling intimidated.
Yeah, because I think, it's so interesting because when I started the Shingle Life, this entrepreneurial journey is just something, because you just never know what you're going to get day to day. When I started the Shingle Life, I really wanted to talk to people about how difficult it was to run a business. But then I was like, everybody's talking about that, right? And also, they don't want to hear from me why it's difficult to run a business. They want to hear from the people who have succeeded, like who are super rich, why it's difficult to run a business, or at least my voice is not really going to stand out. But the one thing I kept seeing was that people really needed help with this. And with all the Facebook groups that I was in, people were constantly asking these questions. And I was just like, wait a minute, like, can't they just Google this stuff? And then I started Googling it, and it was like, oh, now I understand why, because there's so much conflicting information out there. That's why people literally don't know what to do.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, it's funny you mentioned Facebook groups, because as soon as a legal thread pops up in a Facebook group, I hide the thread. I'm like, I can't. I know it's about to be some craziness in here. I will not let you lead me astray.
I I know, because there's so much information on the internet. There is so much. I've spoken to like 4 or 5 people because I did a survey. I talk about this in my podcast, and I did a survey. I did some course calls, and everybody who I spoke to had the same issue of not knowing where to start, but somebody had told them something different. Like, oh yeah, definitely do this, definitely do that.
Yeah. So how do you set up a business? Like, let's jump into, the first thing, the number one question that came up, and these are direct questions from the Side Hustle Pro community. Like, how do you set up a business, and what type of business entity should you choose?
Okay. So the reason why this is a difficult question is because it varies so much based on these 3 things. First, the state you live in, right? So each state has its own laws and its own procedures and regulations for how to start a business and for what protection it provides for each business. And then each state also has a completely different amount of how much it charges to maintain that actual entity, or whether or not it charges taxes, or whether or not you have any other obligations. So that's the first thing. The states vary widely. So somebody in Virginia can't tell somebody in New York, oh yeah, just start an LLC. You don't know what it's like in New York, right? That's 1. 2, it depends on that person's own personal situation, right? So depending on your personal situation, you may want to start a certain entity and not another one. And then the other thing is your business goals. What are your business goals? What are your long-term goals? What are you planning on doing with this company? What are you planning on doing right now with this company? So if you take those 3 things, you could talk to 10 people and you're not going to get the same answer. So a good place to start is to go to Google and type in how to start a business and then plug in your state. Now, the problem with that is when you do that, you're going to get LegalZoom. That's going to be the first thing that'll come up. And then the next thing will be incorporate.com. And then the next thing will be the next company that charges you a fee to pay a fee to your state. And they do that because they pay like a gazillion dollars in advertising so they can come up first. But you don't need to go through those services. Just look for your actual state's agency, and that'll usually end in .gov. Now, some of the things that you want to consider when you go to the website of your state, they're going to give you a rundown. These are the different types of entities. The main ones are sole proprietorship. Now, there are others, but these are the 3 that most small businesses are looking at. Sole proprietorship, limited liability company, which we refer to as LLC, and a corporation. Now, S-corps are a little different. I'll address that later. So those are the 3 main ones. Now, the factors that you want to think about in deciding which one you want to choose is a sole proprietorship is basically not separate from you as a legal entity. So any actions or any lawsuits or any liabilities that arise under your conducting business with your sole proprietorship, you are personally liable. And that just means your personal assets are liable. So if you own a house and it has any equity in it, if you own a car, if you have cash in the bank, if you have a job, your wages could actually be up for grabs. If this person sues you and wins, they could recover from any of those things. Now, I tell people, if you have nothing, like if you are starting out and you don't own a home, you don't own a car, maybe you live in the city, right? A lot of people in DC live in apartments, don't have homes, but you want to start this business, don't stress yourself out. You may be able to do it as a sole proprietorship, right? So there's no right answer when it comes to that. Now, for an LLC, what the LLC does is it limits your liability to the assets that are in your business. So if you have $1,000 cash in the bank for your LLC, and that's your LLC business account, and somebody sues you for $10,000, they win, they can only recover $1,000 because that's all that's in the business assets, because the action is against you as the owner of your business, not you personally. So most people, if they own a home, own a car, have money in the bank, another job possibly, they may feel more comfortable with an LLC. Now, the corporation, that's it's not necessarily like a big thing, but it's very formal. You would have to have a board, So that means even if you're a single shareholder, because corporations have shareholders, if you're a single shareholder, you still have to find two other people who are going to be your secretary and your treasurer. So it's a bit more formal. It's more formalities. You have to have meetings. You have to record the meetings. They have to be approved. You have to issue shareholder certificates. So a corporation is more formal. So most people are really looking at a sole proprietorship or an LLC. And so it really depends on your own circumstances. If you don't really have much at risk, then starting a sole proprietorship may be the thing for you, and that's fine. Now, the other thing to consider is the cost. And it varies state by state, because in Virginia, for example, to start an LLC is $100 when you initially register. And then every year after that, it's $50. That's it. And you just pay that $50 every year. Now, in other states, for example, in New York, it's like a $200 fee, and then you have to pay a franchise tax for having an entity if it's a pass-through entity. And then if you live in Manhattan, you need to pay a publisher fee for all the income you make. So it can add up depending on where you live. And then I heard in California, it's probably about $800 or $900 every year.
That brings up an important point, because why does everyone love Delaware? When I was starting my LLC, everyone was telling me, like, do it in Delaware. It's better. And I don't know why, but
okay, so
I believe them.
This is the time for me to plug my own podcast, because I actually talked about this Delaware mess for a bit.
Yes.
So I just started a 4-part series, a Getting Started, where I go into way more depth, right? Because we have a lot of questions to cover, but I go into way more depth about which to choose and why. But I hate that. Delaware. Let me tell you about Delaware. So, and without going into the legal history of corporations. So back in the day, Delaware was basically like at the forefront. Like back in the 1980s was really when shareholder lawsuits became a big thing, right? And so Delaware was one of the first states that developed a body of law that guided corporations on how to deal with their shareholders, like the procedures they need to put in place when they want to sell their companies and what rights the shareholders have. And so because corporations like predictability, they basically started forming their corporations in Delaware, because they know that Delaware has developed this body of law. And if you know that Delaware says the procedures for selling your company is notifying your shareholders, and then you have to give them 30 days, and then you have to give them 100 days to do this, and then you can sell the company. So they know if they follow those rules, they're not going to get sued. So they started their company in Delaware because Delaware was the first to come up with this body of law that corporations could rely upon. And so then Delaware was like, oh, wait a minute. These guys are depending on us, so we'll just make it open. You can start your entity in Delaware. And they started charging them all these fees because you have these major corporations that are willing to pay for the certainty, right? So for that reason, people started associating Delaware with the place to form a business. But it's completely misguided because it doesn't apply.
It's like the best brand campaign of all time.
Well, here's the thing. Delaware doesn't charge sales tax to its residents because they make so much money on corporations and these small business owners who are forming their LLCs and paying out the wazoo for a ridiculous amount of money. And here's the thing. For an LLC, the LLC Act, which is the law that governs limited liability companies. It says, like, if you form a limited liability and you don't write your own contract, your own operating agreement for your business, and anything happens to you or happens to that business, if you don't have your own contract, then the law applies. So, and that's called the Limited Liability Act. This Limited Liability Act is basically the same in every single state. So if you're forming your LLC in California versus Delaware versus Virginia, Florida, for the most part, it's exactly the same. You're getting the same protection. You have the same rules. So when it comes to an LLC, there's really no reason for you to form your LLC in a different state. But here's the other thing that's a kicker. Let's say you go and form your LLC in Delaware and you live in Virginia. So you're an online business person. All of your business is in Virginia. Guess what you have to do? You have to also form a foreign entity in Virginia because you're operating business in Virginia. So now you have the entity in Virginia, in Delaware, that you're paying every year for. And then you have the entity in Virginia you're also paying every year for. So you're not going to get out of not forming your entity in your own state. It's just, it's like the dumbest. I am going on record to say it is the dumbest advice anybody will give you. And so people need to stop saying that.
First.
Like, don't form your entity.
We are clearing it up. The Side Hustle Pro podcast has cleared it up for y'all. Yeah. Alrighty. Now, speaking of money and not getting out of paying things, let's talk about the IRS.
Yes.
And something that a lot of people think about is, should I be starting an actual business bank account? And if so, when? What should I be thinking about in terms of that?
Okay. So as far as starting the business bank account, now, if you are a sole proprietorship, you're not a separate legal entity from your business. So you can use your own social security number to start a business account. Now, I still advise that you do that even if you're a sole proprietor, because you want to keep your business expenses separate. Now, the reason why people say, because people always talk about commingling of funds, blah, blah, blah. The reason people say that is because you get to deduct your business expenses. That means if somebody pays you $500 for a photo shoot, let's say you're a photographer, they pay you $500 for a photo shoot, or actually, let's say $1,000. The reason I say $1,000 is because anybody who pays you for a service is required to issue you a 1099 if it's over $600. So that's another thing people don't know. They're supposed to be issuing these 1099s. And if you don't issue it, then the IRS can come back to you and charge you the money that person was supposed to pay, but that's a different issue. Put that on the list for stuff we need to talk about later. But anyway.
Right, this is just part one, you guys.
I know.
We'll add it to part two.
So anyway, let's say they pay you $1,000. This person is now going to issue you a 1099. That means that they're going to send a note to the IRS saying, we paid Nikayla $1,000. So the IRS is going to be looking for you to include that $1,000 on your tax return. Well, if you spent $20 in gas going to the shoot, if you had to buy, I don't know, a shadow box, a camera, blah, blah, you get to deduct all of those things. So at the end of the day, that $1,000 that they paid you may end up being $400 because of your expenses. So that means you're only responsible for paying taxes on that $400. Thing is, if you're not keeping really good track of your expenses, you're doing one of two things. You're either underestimating your expenses. That means you're losing money. Because if all of your expenses are really $700, but you can only account for $500, that means you're paying taxes on $500. Or you're overestimating. And if you're overestimating, that means you're cheating the IRS. Now, is the IRS going to call every single person and say, let's look through this, let's look through this? Not necessarily, but they do audit. There is a division at the IRS that is called the Small Business mid-size something, but they focus on is small businesses. So if you get audited by the IRS and you've put that you took a $700 expense deduction and you can't account for that $700, they're going to take that $200 deduction away from you. Then you're going to be charged the taxes that you were supposed to pay on it. Then you're going to be charged a penalty for underreporting your tax. And then you're going to get charged interest. So that's why it's important to keep track of your expenses. Now, do you need an accountant to do that for you? No, because an accountant can't, every time you go swipe your card or you use cash, they're not going to keep your receipts. You know, that's just one of the jobs of being a business owner. You really have to make sure you manage this stuff. And depending on, you know, where you are when you start. When I first start all of my businesses, I start with a spreadsheet, you know, until I start getting to the point where the expenses are just too much. And then I switch to some app. The other one, I don't want to call it because I know.
Right. A FreshBooks competitor.
Yeah, exactly. But it's great at helping me, you know, in my accountant. I do have an accountant, but that's because I have a law firm and we have like so many ethical obligations with what we have to do.
What about, you know, hiring a CPA? Someone asks, is it necessary to have a CPA help with taxes?
So that depends on how complicated your overall tax situation is. I personally don't think you need an accountant just because you start a side hustle. Because if you keep track of your expenses, right? If you, and you know, in the first year, if you're not really making money, it shouldn't be difficult to do. If you keep track of I guess I'm just a lawyer, but I keep a spreadsheet of, before I went to the competitor, I keep a spreadsheet of every like medical equipment expenses, transportation, tolls. I keep everything. And so at the end of the year, you can use any of these programs like the competitor or the other competitor or the other competitor. And you can you can, I mean, like, you can use QuickBooks, H&R Block. I don't know what the other one is, but any of these online tax, I don't know what they're called, tax reporting.
TurboTax.
You can use them. All those systems are very complicated. They will walk you through. They will say, do you have a business? And if you say yes, then they will ask you, did you have communication expenses? Did you have car expenses? They will walk through every single step for you. So you don't necessarily need to get an accountant to do your taxes. Now, I have one because I own a home, I have a law firm, and we have really weird reporting obligations or how we have to hold our clients' money. And so I use an accountant, and I have a kid, I do childcare. So I have all of these not issues, but all of these tax
considerations.
Considerations.
It's complex. Right.
And I know, like, even though I'm a tax lawyer, but I know a tax accountant knows the deduction stuff way better than I am. And I want to get every single type of deduction possible that I can get. And so
Amen.
I don't want to leave any money on the table. So that's why I use
Speaking of which, what about, when is it time to report extra income? Like, do you report that $500 you made, if that's all you made last year, or, all you made after you take out expenses? Like, talk about that.
Okay. So for the most part, this is very simple. I'm sure like an economist can tell you something else of what income means. But for tax purposes, income is basically your revenue, which is all the money you bring in, income equals revenue minus expenses. So all of your expenses, your office supplies, mileage, your mail automation system, Gmail, every possible expense that you have, you get to deduct when you are running a business, right? So you will deduct all of those expenses. So let's say at the end of year one, you brought in 2 photo shoots and they were each $500. And so you got $1,000. And at the end of the year, all of your expenses, and they came up to, let's say, $800. So you have $200 of income. You have to report those $200 in income. I know it's $200, but you got to report it. But here's the thing. If you are just starting your business, you likely have a full-time job, right? So you're not doing a tax return only for $200 worth of income. You're just going to do what's called a Schedule C, which is where if you are a sole proprietorship or an LLC, you don't file a separate tax return for your business. An LLC, it's what's called a flow-through. So all of the income from your LLC or all of the losses from your LLC and your sole proprietorship, well, the sole proprietorship is not really an entity, so it is you. But for an LLC, it flows through, it breaks that barrier of the LLC business that you've set up and flows through into your regular personal tax return. And you report all of your business activity for your LLC on what's called a Schedule C. Now, the Schedule C will say revenue, expenses, and then it'll subtract B from A, and that's what you get as income, and that will go on a line on your 1040. Now, if you have losses, then the losses will go to reduce your income. So let's say you make $50,000 from your regular job and you just started this business and you spent all this year just, buying everything, your camera, your light box, and setting up your email system. And you didn't really do any photo shoots. But at the end of the year, you basically put about, $2,000 into this business. So that $2,000 is going to go on the same line, but it's going to be a negative $2,000, and it's going to reduce your $50,000 down to $48,000. But if you made $2,000 in income, it's going to increase your $50,000 to $52,000. But the minute you get anything above zero, you have to report it.
Good to know. Good to know. What are some other legal considerations when side hustling with a full-time job?
I mean, I think a few weeks back, you talked about how to manage your side hustle with your full-time job.
And right. How to not get fired.
Yeah, how to not get fired. That's right. How to not get fired legally really is you really, you should look in your employee handbook. A lot of people, I see this, sometimes I just can't answer questions because then I'm like, I don't, but anyway, before you start a side hustle, you really do want to look to see what your employee handbook says about starting, your own business or working on the side. If you have at-will employment, they can't necessarily prevent you from, having another job. But obviously, then you have to think about the non-legal consideration of how that time is going to affect your time at your other job. But as far as the legal, look to see if they say anything about it, right? Because if you've agreed to be employed there, then you agree to the terms in the handbook. And if they have any language as to what you can do, then you have to be held by that. The other thing you want to make sure is that, and you talked about this, if you haven't signed a non-compete agreement, it doesn't mean that you can still compete with your employers, right? So you want to make sure that what you're doing is not necessarily competing with them. Like, for example, if you're using their equipment or, their what you've learned to go and open up your own business and directly compete, you could be held liable. The other thing that you want to make sure is, not to use your job's equipment. I know it's tempting to use the computer at your job to do your, write your blog post or whatever, but any work that you create while you're in the employ or at your employer's location on their equipment technically could be considered to be owned by them. So, I mean, I've never heard of anyone saying, oh, I'm now going to own your blog because you did all this stuff while you were here. But hey, lawyers do crazy things. And in about a couple of weeks, I'm going to have somebody on my podcast. This story is so crazy. I don't want to go too much into it, but somebody basically got sued for copyright infringement for something I don't do because I am just so afraid of it, but everybody does it every single day. And there's someone out there literally like
talk about a teaser,
looking for people to do this very thing that everybody think is so inconsequential and hit them with a huge lawsuit. Oh, it's crazy.
All right. So that brings up the issue of how to protect our digital content. So first of all, can you give us a general overview of intellectual property? Like, what's the difference between copyright versus trademark versus patent versus trade secrets? Did I cover them all?
Yeah, well, for the most part. I'm sure there's something out there that we're probably not covering. Okay. So copyright is basically the protection of an expression which could either be artistic or written, right? So we're talking about maybe an piece of artwork, written work, like digital content, blogs, and anything that would be considered an expression, implied or expressed, of the artist. And you own the rights to your material, the copyrights rights to your material the minute you publish it. But I'll come back to that later. And then trademark. So when you trademark something, you are protecting your name, the brand name, the logo, or some kind of expression like a motto. So Side Hustle Pro is the name of your business. You could trademark that. If you had a logo or if you consider the symbol for yours, I mean, like, whenever anybody sees that gold symbol, it's so prominent in my mind anyway, I think that definitely is your logo. So that could be protected. Like if I wanted to start a podcast and call it like Pro something else, and I use that, and we're kind of talking about something similar, that could be seen as a trademark infringement. That's what a trademark protects. Now, patent is more technical. That's sort of a mechanical or engineering device that's used to either create something else or that is a part of something. So it's, that would be like the chip that goes into your iPhone, or how to design something. Like maybe if you came up with a great way to design like a Barbie doll that moves, the mechanical device that goes into it, you would get patent for all of those different parts. And then the last one, trade secret. A trade secret is like proprietary information. So let's say you've come up with a system that's proven to get guests to respond and come onto the show, and you've spent your time in developing this and it works and you've implemented it. That is a trade secret that you could protect. You could say, hey, anybody who comes to work with me, this is a procedure that I've put in place. I developed it myself. These are the systems that I use to develop them, and it works. that it could be a trade secret. And I think trade secrets are probably, a lot of people kind of know about copyrights and trademark. That's coming up more. But trade secrets are probably one of the most unprotected assets that a lot of people don't even know exist. We all know that we have copyrights, and we don't necessarily know how to protect it, but trade secrets people don't even think about. And so that's one of the things when you're hiring someone to work with you, even a virtual assistant or any professional, a web designer, you want to make sure that you put in your agreement with them that they are held to the standard of protecting your trade secrets.
So you said you would come back to copyright.
Yes.
Now. How do we really copyright? You say as soon as you hit publish,
Yes.
We're technically copyrighted? Okay.
Yeah, I say technically because, and you will hear a lot of people say that your copyrights are protected the minute you hit publish. And yes, it is, right? That just means that you're claiming it and you're saying to the world that I'm letting you know that I am the owner. So you can't ever come back and say you didn't know who owned this. That's what putting the little C in the C in the circle is really saying. But if that person used your copyrighted material or infringed upon it, and you have not registered it, because a lot of people say, oh, you don't have to register it the minute you hit publish, blah, blah. But here's the thing. If you don't register it, you can't pursue money damages right away. So if you register your copyright, which you can do by going to the U.S. Copyright Office, online, not the actual office. Well, you can go there too. I'm sure they'd be glad to see you because they probably see no one. But anyway, so if you register it, you are protected by the copyright registration, and you can receive damages up to $150,000. That's a statutory amount. So if someone infringes upon your copyright, then you can say, hey, remove this copyright, remove this material from your website, and this is how much you owe me because this copyright is registered. And you owe that person that because it's registered. Well, I mean, you could go to court and say, no, it's really worth, $1,000 and not 25, but you have to now go to court. That person has the advantage of already having it registered. If you have not registered your copyright and somebody infringes upon it, you can go to court and sue them, but you then have to prove the damages. You have to prove the amount, which you still have to do even if you've registered your copyright, but you would have to go back and register the copyright first before you could bring the claim in U.S. District Court. And if you have not registered, or if you have registered it, there's a presumption that you own it because you've already registered it. So yes, it's true that the minute you hit publish, your copyright is protected. But in my mind, personally, to me, that means nothing. This is coming from a lawyer. It just simply means nothing. So people will tell you that to make you feel good, but to me, it means nothing. Yeah. Register it. It's like $35, and you go through the website. So
are you registering the copyright of your entire blog? Like, what exactly are you?
So here's the thing. Like, I don't tell people to register their entire blog because, you would spend all day on the copyright website to register your blog. But I think that if you have workbooks, if you have maybe what they call an epic blog post, I think those are probably more worthy of being copyrighted because they give so much valuable information, and you could probably later take it to use it to, as the starting foundation of a book or an ebook. So I would usually say your epic blog posts or photographs. Photographs are a tricky one. They're really, really tricky because, the minute you take a photograph, how often can you really copyright every single photograph?
Especially in today's age of Instagram,
And there was recently a lawsuit against Khloe Kardashian because she hired some guy to take a photo of her. He took the photo of her. He sent a copy of it to her with his mark on it. She removed the mark and posted it on Instagram or somewhere the next day. And he's suing her. And, everybody's like, oh, beware. See, this could happen to you. And I'm starting to think, this happened yesterday. Did he copyright it? okay, he's suing her, and yeah, like it's Khloe Kardashian. She's probably just gonna like either take it down or throw money at him. But really, I thought about that. Like, how quickly can he copyright his photo? Yeah, he put his mark on it. But then the question is, did she sign an agreement? Did she sign an agreement that he owns the copyright, right? So usually the copyright is owned by the person who originates the product. So if he took the picture, the copyright is his. So if they sign an agreement and she agreed that it was his copyright, then he can sue her for breach of contract, right? But not necessarily that it's a copyright infringement. Does that make sense? I know it seems like...
No, that makes sense. Yeah. That makes sense.
And the standard is different. That's the main thing.
Right. And I want to bring it all back and bring it home because, we're getting ready to wrap up. And I know you guys that we have presented a lot, but we wanted to get as thorough as possible on these topics of starting out because, these are the questions we saw the most, how to get started, what kind of business entity to form. And then, Art, one thing I want people to take away is, like, when should I be looking into trademarking and how? We are side hustlers, right? Like, we cannot hire an attorney. I know how you feel. I know how you feel about LegalZoom, but ...
Okay, I know. It's tough. It is a tough one. So when should you start copywriting? Trademarking. I think maybe a year ago, 2 years ago, I would have said, kind of wait and see how it turns out, see how this business ends up. But I think we're really living in a time where the online market or online business is just taking off. And everybody has basically the same idea. I'm sorry, there's not really much that's original out there. The one thing that makes everything different is you, the person who's presenting it, and how you relate to your audience. So there's no question that if you have one idea, there are 10 or 15 other people who have this, or hundreds of people who have the same idea. So, I think that you should consider where you want this product to go or where you want this business to go and how strongly do you feel about it. I haven't trademarked the Shingle Life, but that's because I kind of feel like, not that I don't like it, but I'm just like, it's not something that I can concern myself with right now. But also at the same time, I feel like, okay, somebody steals it, I'll just change something else. I don't know. Maybe that's crazy. I would never tell a client to do that. But I think that the bottom line is, if somebody started using the Shingle Life, I wouldn't be devastated. I wouldn't feel like I couldn't start over. I wouldn't feel like this was my big, great idea that just slipped through my hands. Now, if, 5 or 6 years from now, the Shingle Life is this huge thing that everybody knows, and yeah, it makes sense to copyright it. So to answer the question, I would say if starting out, you feel so strongly about this, you really feel like this name or this motto or the name of your business is so unique, then I would start thinking about trademarking it immediately because, yeah, there's a cost to it. And there are other things that you can do. I'm hoping, I don't know when this will come out, but maybe if I say this here, then people will hold me to it. I'm really trying to design a course where I can walk people through step by step how to copyright their material. Because as much as you don't want to pay legal fees, I don't have enough time to help every person who wants to copyright their material or trademark their material in a day's time or a month's time, and and that's one of the reasons why, I really did shift my business model is because I realize that people need this in such a high volume that I'm not able to provide on one-on-one. So and
it's not very clear, where can you go as an independent person to get this done? Should you go directly to the USTPO website?
Yes.
Or,
Well, so you could submit an application on your own you don't need a lawyer to do it for you. Now, the chances of you getting it through and probably doing it properly without the help or guidance of a lawyer, it's going to be lower. That's the same reason why LegalZoom doesn't have a very high rate of success with trademarks. And the problem with trademarks is that I think about 80 or 90% of them, even when you do use a lawyer, get an office action. And that's basically like this really long letter that describes every single thing legally that is wrong with your trademark. And so now you have to respond legally for why, it's a good trademark. And a lot of people kind of stop at that point because, even when I get that stuff, I'm just like, come on, man. So I can just, I can imagine what it feels like for someone who has like no legal training. So, I mean, it's a tough decision. I think there are probably a couple of lawyers who try to offer a reduced rate, but just simply because of the amount of work that is involved in doing a trademark, it's just difficult to charge such a low rate. And that's actually one of the reasons why I really want to like come up with a step-by-step course where literally I would like videotape my screen. There's a more technical word for that, showing people like what to click on, what to do, how to get through, at least giving them the information.
That would be awesome. So what I'm hearing from you, to just kind of recap, is people starting out, side hustlers, that shouldn't be your first concern. But as you are working through it, if it's something that you're like, you'd be devastated if someone else came in. And, still, this is something like really do some soul searching, because sometimes we think we'd be devastated and it's like, it's not that big a deal. Yeah, I mean, so like truly, do some soul searching on it.
It's a tough thing to say. If you feel, look, here's the thing though. And this is what business, like when you're trying to shift your mindset to a business owner, you have to get used to doing. Think about, I know that $2,500 sounds like a lot to hire a lawyer, but think about how much more money you will lose. And this is what I tell people who say they can't afford me. I'm like, you're looking at it as I'm only, that if you don't hire me, you're saving $2,500. But if you don't hire me, you're putting $100,000 possibly at risk because you're not protecting yourself. Because if somebody comes back to sue you, they're not suing you for the $2,500 I charged you. If they're making money off of your trademark, they're not making $2,500. They're making probably $100,000 because of the way in which we can use and market people's digital content instantly. So I know it sounds like a lot, but that $2,500 is worth it to protect this digital content or this asset that you have. And I think if you are designing an online course, immediately you should be thinking, as you're thinking of what you're going to call it, you should be searching the trademark database if you're doing an online course or ebook. Now, if it's just you're starting a company, maybe that's a little different because you don't know where it's going to go. But if you know you're putting that digital content of an online course or an ebook out there, I say immediately start thinking about trademark.
Alrighty. Well, this was very, very good. Art, I feel like I learned a ton, even as someone who has gone through some of these steps already. To kind of wrap on a positive note, I think as entrepreneurs, we put a lot of stress and pressure on ourselves to get everything right. And look, you guys, you're not going to get everything right. I didn't get everything right. I think losing some money on you trying to set up your business and really go for it and push through in the big scheme of things is not the worst thing you could lose money on, right? So if you make a fumble along the way, don't beat yourself up about it, but just listen to this episode, take notes. Art has been so great to provide a cheat sheet for this episode, and let's just continue to have these conversations. But what were you going to say, Art?
I was just going to say, it's not that big a deal. If you started a corporation in Delaware, just don't renew it and start it where you live. If you started a sole proprietorship and that's not working for you, then start an LLC. If you did an LLC, too expensive, go to something else. It's not that big. It's not the end of the world. That's not the biggest decision you'll make in your business. Right. Don't fret over it.
Exactly. And again, it's the cost of doing business, there are a lot of things that you could be losing money on, you could be wasting money on, and it's not wasting money. You're investing in yourself. So there are going to be fumbles along the way, especially when you don't have an attorney. But, like Art said, you could consider doing away with all of that and investing in an attorney from the start so you can do away with some of these fumbles. So let's talk some more. Again, this is one of these shows that will have an after show on Thursday. Yay. So join us on Facebook. Yay! At 9:30 on Thursday. All right, guys? So this is when we come to a close. This was just part one. If you have more legal questions, join the Side Hustle Pro community, sidehustlepro.co/Facebook, and then we'll be able to load up some more questions for part two. Alrighty. Wait, so Art, what's the best way that we can connect with you after this episode to hear all the other juicy episodes that you are planning?
Okay, so I have a podcast and it's called The Shingle Life, and I'm on Instagram at The Shingle Life, and you can listen to episodes of the podcast on iTunes and Stitcher, and you can go to the website, which is www.theshinglelife.com/podcast, and you will get all of the latest episodes. And the other thing I was going to mention is not only are we going to do a cheat sheet for this episode, but for all of the episodes that I'm doing in the Getting Started series, I'm creating a cheat sheet that'll help guide you through this entire process. And I can tell you that the first one that I've created is a list, among all other things, of all of the state agencies that create entities. So I've created hyperlinks to all of them. So guess what? Ooh. You guys don't even need to get trapped in legal Zoom world. You can just go to theshinglelife.com/podcast and download it. But this has been amazing. I'm so happy I can help people. That's the best part of this.
This has been super informative and educational. So thank you so much, Art, for being in the guest chair.
Thank you for having me.
All right, guys. And there you have it. Hey, guys. Thanks for listening to Side Hustle Pro. If you want to hear more from me, head on over to sidehustlepro.co/Side Hustle Corner to get my weekly Side Hustle Diaries chronicles about my own journey from passion project to profitable business. And if you want to find me online, I'm at Side Hustle Pro on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Don't forget to join the Side Hustle Pro Facebook community. Go to sidehustlepro.co/mastermind. And as always, if you love the show, do me a favor and subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. Thanks, guys. Talk to you next week.